Today, we're diving deep into a legal battle that was, for all intents and purposes, a true David versus Goliath story. It pitted a small Indian drug maker against a global pharmaceutical giant. But this was never really just about patents or profits. At its heart, this whole fight was about something much more fundamental: the price of a life-saving drug and who gets to decide who can afford to live. This is the story of Natco versus Bayer. So before we get into all the legal twists and turns, we have to talk about the human story here. Because this wasn't some abstract corporate fight happening in a boardroom. No, this was about real people, real families who were facing a terrible diagnosis and then an even more impossible choice. And really, this slide gets right to the point. Just think about that for a second. What if a doctor told you that there's a medicine that could save you or someone you love, but then in the very next breath told you that you can't have it, not because it's not available, but simply because you can't afford it? That right there, that's the gut-wrenching dilemma that kicked this whole thing off. Okay, so let's put a number on this. We're talking about Bayer's drug, Nexavar. It's a critical treatment for certain types of kidney and liver cancer. And the cost? Roughly 280,000 rupees for a single month's supply. To put that into perspective for you, that is more money than many families in India make in an entire year or even several years. The price tag itself was a barrier just as big, just as scary as the disease itself. So you have this impossible price tag. And that's when one company decided, you know what, we're going to challenge this. And that decision set the stage for this classic underdog fight that would end up shaking the entire pharmaceutical world. And here they are, our two contenders. On one side, you have the Goliath, Bayer, a global pharma titan holding the patent with what seemed like endless resources. And on the other side, you've got David, Natco Pharma, a much, much smaller Indian company that makes generic drugs. And they came forward with an incredibly bold claim. They said they could make the exact same medicine, but for just a tiny fraction of the cost. So how in the world was Natco going to pull this off? Well, their whole strategy was built around this powerful but not often used legal tool called compulsory licensing. What is that? Well, you can think of it like a safety valve that's built right into international patent law. It basically says that, look, patents are important, but they can't be absolute. If a patented product, especially a medicine, isn't being made available to the public on reasonable terms, say the price is just outrageously high, the government can actually step in and say, okay, we're authorizing another company to produce it. This was Natco's weapon. All right, so with the battle lines drawn, the fight moved out of the marketplace and straight into the legal arena. The whole case landed in front of India's Controller General of Patents, and this is where both companies would have to lay out all their arguments. So let's just quickly walk through how we got here. It all started back in 2008. That's when Bayer got the Indian patent for Nexavar, and for 3 years, they were the only game in town. Then, in 2011, Natco makes its big move. They file India's first ever application for a compulsory license. And that leads us to 2012, and the crucial hearings that would decide the fate of this drug. Now, this is where it gets really interesting, because you can see the two completely different worldviews clashing. Bayer's argument was, look, we need strong patents. That's how we pay for the billions of dollars in research it takes to invent these new medicines. And hey, the drug is available, if you can afford it. But Natco's argument was just as powerful. They said, sure, patents are important, but they shouldn't become a death sentence. Available has to mean affordable. And when you're talking about a public health crisis, people's lives have to come first. So after all the arguments were heard, this really complex stance between innovation, profits, patents, and public health, it was time for a decision. And this wasn't just about Bayer and Natco anymore. The real question was, what would the court prioritize? The rights of a patent holder or the right of the public to access medicine? The answer was going to set a huge precedent. And the verdict, it was absolutely historic. For the very first time in India, a compulsory license was granted. The court sided with Natco Pharma. They officially broke Bayer's monopoly on this life-saving drug. And the court's reasoning? Well, you can see it right here in their own words. It was crystal clear. It really just came down to one simple fact. The price was, and I'm quoting, exorbitant and out of reach. The court decided that because Bayer hadn't made the drug reasonably affordable, they had failed to meet the needs of the public, and that failure opened the legal door for Natco. That verdict landed like an absolute shockwave. I mean, this wasn't just a win for a small Indian company. This was a decision that sent ripples all across the globe, and it fundamentally changed the entire conversation about who gets access to medicine. And this chart? Wow, this shows you the real-world impact better than anything else.
Just look at that difference. The price of 1 month's supply of this cancer drug plummeted from Bayer's 280,000 rupees all the way down to Natco's price of 8,800. That is a staggering price drop of almost 97%. Just think about that. Overnight, a life-saving treatment went from being a luxury for a tiny few to an actual possibility for thousands.
So what's the big takeaway here? Well, this case did way more than just lower the price of one single drug. It was a powerful statement that governments have the right to put public health first, ahead of patent monopolies. It, of course, made a life-saving drug accessible to thousands more people, but it also created a legal blueprint that other developing countries could follow. And it forced a massive global debate about fair drug pricing that's still going on today.
Which, of course, brings us all the way back to that one huge, difficult question. In a world full of these incredible medical breakthroughs, who gets to decide the price of a life? Now, the Natco versus Bayer case didn't solve that puzzle completely, but it did make one thing very clear. The answer can't just be the company that happens to hold the patent. It's a debate that continues to rage on, trying to find that delicate balance between rewarding innovation and recognizing the fundamental human right to health.